Welcome back. Sit back and relax as today's revenge story takes place in Lake Travis.
My name is Cassidy Monroe. I am 29. And the day my sister turned her job into a weapon against me started like any other quiet drive out to the lake. I was just going to open up the house my grandmother left me, crack a few windows, maybe drink coffee on the dock. Instead, the first thing I saw was a bright orange notice bolted right into the front door. The letters were so large I could read them from the driveway. Severe structural damage, 15 days to repair, or the property would be seized and demolished. It felt like someone had taken a sledgehammer to my chest. This place is worth more than I will probably make in a decade, and suddenly a piece of paper was telling me it was one bad inspection away from becoming rubble. Before I could even pull the notice off the door, my phone started ringing. It was my sister, sounding oddly calm, like she had been waiting for this moment. She said she had already heard about the inspection at work, that situations like mine almost never end well, and then she slid her offer in like it was a favor. She would buy the house for $150,000, barely 35% of what it is worth, and she could close fast so I would not have to watch the demolition. When I told her no, she dropped the sympathy and snapped back, that if I would not take the money, I should get ready to watch my grandmother's house get torn down plank by plank. For a few days, I honestly believed her. I walked through every room wondering if this was the last time I would see it standing. What I did not know was that a week earlier, long before that orange notice ever touched my front door, the hidden security cameras my grandmother installed had already recorded everything that really happened on this property. One login to her old cloud account turned that terrifying notice into evidence, and my sister's perfect little plan started to fall apart in minutes. If you want to hear how she tried to use the city against me, how those cameras exposed her, and how every move she made came back on her, keep listening until the end. I guess to really explain how we got there, I have to rewind a little and tell you why that lake house mattered so much in the first place. I grew up in Austin, but every important memory I have of feeling safe is tied to that A-frame place on Lake Travis. When my parents were fighting or too busy, my grandma would drive in to get me on Fridays and take me back out with her. We would wake up before sunrise, sit on the end of the dock with chipped coffee mugs, and she would tell me that some places feel like people, and this house was one of them. As I got older, I was the one driving her. While my sister chased promotions and titles and posted about grind culture on LinkedIn, I was the one taking Grandma Evelyn to doctor appointments, changing light bulbs, and sleeping on the lumpy couch whenever her breathing got bad. I work as a UX writer remotely, which means I can do my job from a laptop and a half-decent Wi-Fi signal. So for the last 5 years of her life, I spent more nights at the lake than in my own apartment in the city. My sister liked to show up on holidays in a blazer straight from the office, kiss Grandma on the cheek, drop off some flowers, and then disappear again. Grandma noticed. She would say things like, "Your sister shows up when there is an audience, you show up when there is work." I thought she was just venting. I did not realize she was also making decisions. When she passed, she left a handwritten letter and a formal will. The will said the lake house and its little savings account went to me, and my sister would get $120,000 in cash and Grandma's old SUV, which was still in good condition. The letter was less polite. In it, Grandma spelled out that she wanted the person who actually loved and cared for the house to keep it, not the person who only saw dollar signs on the water. My sister did not take that well. She hired a lawyer, tried to contest the will, and threw around words like undue influence and manipulation, as if I had forced Grandma into loving me more. The court heard from doctors, nurses, and neighbors who all said the same thing, that Evelyn was sharp until the very end, and that I was the one who took care of her. The judge upheld the will. My sister walked out of that courtroom with less money than she expected, a bruised ego, and a look that told me this was not over. I just did not understand yet how far she was willing to go to make sure the house did not stay mine. After that first phone call, I just stood there on the porch, with the orange notice in my hand, trying to make sense of it. The more I actually read the language, the worse it felt. It was not just some routine warning. It said things like imminent collapse risk, pier and foundation failure, unsafe for occupancy, 15 days to remedy or the county will seize and demolish the structure. There was a rough estimate scribbled in the margins from the inspector, more than $200,000 in probable repairs. That is not the kind of number you just pull out of thin air, and it is definitely not the kind of number a normal person can cover in 2 weeks. I kept asking myself the same question on repeat. How does a house that has hosted family barbecues and fishing trips for decades suddenly become a ticking time bomb overnight? I walked around the outside, looking for cracks, sagging beams, anything. And all I saw was the same deck Grandma and I had sanded and sealed just a few summers before. The timing started to bother me too. The notice was dated that morning, stamped and signed, and my sister had called within 20 minutes of me pulling into the driveway. She had not driven past. She had not gotten a text from a neighbor. She works in the city in Austin. The only way she would have known that fast is if the notice went through the same system she lives in every day. That is when the other shoe dropped in my mind. My sister is not just some random office worker. She is a deputy director in the county's code compliance department, the exact group that handles condemnations, dangerous structures, and public safety hazards. For years, she has bragged about cleaning up blight, about pushing through emergency orders when owners drag their feet. I had always smiled and nodded, proud that she had a solid career, never once imagining that she might point that machine at me. After I hung up on her, she tried subtle pressure first. She texted me a breakdown of how much foundation work can cost, then a follow-up message about how most buyers will not touch a property with a fresh condemn notice on record. A few hours later, I noticed her LinkedIn update about being trusted with the hard calls that protect our communities, like she was rehearsing her own hero narrative. That night, she posted a story of a Lake Travis sunset with a caption about how some people do not understand when a house is more than they can handle, followed by a broken heart emoji and a little house icon. Mutual friends started messaging me asking if everything was okay, if I needed help selling. It felt less like concern and more like a coordinated nudge toward her offer. The longer I sat with it, the more that $150,000 stopped sounding like a lifeline and started sounding like a trap. My sister knew the system. She knew the timing. She knew exactly what fear buttons to push. What she did not know was that I was not ready to sign away my grandmother's house just because she said the word demolition in a calm, professional voice. I decided before I went to sleep that night that before I sold, before I gave up, I was going to get my own answers about just how unsafe this place really was. The next morning, I woke up with that sick, hollow feeling in my stomach and decided if the county was going to call my grandmother's house a death trap, I wanted someone who did not answer to the same people my sister did to tell me why. I posted in a local Austin homeowners group asking if anyone knew a structural engineer who was independent, not tied to the county, and not afraid to disagree if something looked wrong. Within an hour, I had 3 recommendations for the same woman, a semi-retired engineer who had been doing this for 30 years and was known for telling people the truth even when they did not like it. I called, explained the notice, and she agreed to come out on an emergency weekend inspection. She showed up in work boots and a sun hat, introduced herself as Patricia, and the first thing she said when she saw the orange paper was, "This is some serious language for a house that is still standing." She spent almost 3 hours walking that property. She crawled under the deck with a flashlight, checked the piers, tapped along the foundation, inspected the pilings under the dock, looked at the joists in the crawl space, even ran a moisture meter along the baseboards. I watched her face the whole time, waiting for that moment of concern or fear that would confirm the county was right. It never came. When she finally stood up on the deck and wiped her hands on her jeans, she told me, off the record, that the place was in remarkably good shape for a structure its age. The deck supports were solid. The dock pilings looked like they had been replaced within the last few years. There were hairline cracks in the foundation you would expect in any older house in Texas clay soil, but nothing close to imminent collapse. She said if I were her daughter, she would tell me to keep up with normal maintenance and not lose sleep over the house falling into the lake. Then she held up the notice again and said something that made my skin crawl. Someone either saw something I did not, or there is something off about this report. She advised me to request the full inspection file from the county, the actual photos and notes behind the condemn order, because by law they have to keep those records. That afternoon, I filed a public records request online, thinking it would take weeks. Instead, 2 days later, I got an email with a PDF packet attached, labeled with my parcel number and stamped as an emergency unsafe structure case. I opened it and immediately noticed that the inspection was logged at a time the office is usually closed, late in the evening on a Saturday, and that the name approving the emergency order was a supervisor my sister reports to. Buried in the file were photos of rotten dock pilings, split beams, and a warped foundation corner that looked like a disaster zone. At first glance, it all lined up perfectly with the scary words on the notice. But the more I zoomed in, the stranger it looked. A mailbox number in the background did not match ours. A shoreline behind one of the dock shots did not look like Lake Travis at all. In one photo, there was a boat with a marina logo I knew for a fact belonged to a different cove miles away. When I checked the system log page at the end of the packet, I saw my sister's name for the first time in writing, the one she uses at work, right next to a timestamp showing she had manually added my grandmother's address into the emergency inspection queue. That was the moment the conspiracy stopped being something I felt in my gut and became something I could point to on a screen. As I sat there with the file open, I remembered a line from one of Grandma Evelyn's old notebooks sitting in a drawer, a half-joke I had brushed off at the time about having her own eyes on the house even when she was not there. For the first time, I wondered if she had meant that literally. I drove back out to the lake that evening with the PDF still open on my laptop and Grandma's old notebook in my bag. The line I remembered was on a page where she had been writing reminders, grocery lists, little thoughts about the weather. At the bottom she had scribbled, "If anything ever feels off around the house, check the cloud account. I like having my own eyes on things." Under that, in parentheses, she had written, "Same email as always. Password is your birth year, plus the word sunrise." At the time, I had laughed and told her she was being paranoid. Now it felt like she was reaching forward in time to tap me on the shoulder. I opened her old email on my phone, reset the password with a code the provider texted to my number, then logged into the camera app she had installed years ago. I expected to see nothing but dust and maybe a squirrel. Instead, there was an entire folder labeled Lake House Motion with dozens of clips from the week before the condemn notice showed up on my door. The first video was time-stamped just after midnight on a Wednesday. It was dark, but the infrared picked up 3 figures coming down the side path, all in reflective vests, hard hats, work boots. One of them moved like my sister, the same sharp, fast walk I had seen my whole life. When she turned her head toward the back door, the camera caught her face clearly enough that I did not have to guess. Jordan. Behind her was Trevor, my brother-in-law, carrying a sledgehammer in one hand and a 5-gallon bucket in the other. A third man I did not recognize trailed them, holding a tablet and a tape measure. The camera near the dock picked up everything. They went straight to the pilings under the deck. Trevor swung the hammer into one of the support posts, not hard enough to bring anything down, but hard enough to crack the outer layer. Then he took what looked like a smaller container out of the bucket and poured a thick liquid into the damaged area and along the base of the wood, muttering about how it would help things along. The stranger took photos from specific angles, the same kind of angles I had seen in the report from the county. Jordan stood back, giving instructions in that clipped, professional tone she always used when she wanted to sound like the smartest person in the room. At one point she said, "Make it look critical but not cartoonish. I am filing the emergency order on Monday. She will panic by Tuesday." In another clip, they were at the side of the house, digging shallow trenches near the foundation, flooding them with water to make the soil look unstable, then snapping more photos. There was even a moment where the unknown man hesitated, saying something about this feeling messed up, and Jordan brushed him off, telling him that no one was getting hurt, that they were just speeding up what would happen eventually. By the time I finished watching all the videos, my hands were shaking so hard I almost dropped the phone. This was not just my sister talking me into a bad deal. This was my sister, a public official, using her position and her husband's tools to manufacture a fake crisis so she could steal our grandmother's house for pennies. I emailed the entire folder of clips to myself, to a backup account, and to a new email I made on the spot, because I did not trust anything anymore. The next morning, I set up a consultation with a lawyer in Austin who specialized in government corruption cases, a woman named Alexis Grant. I showed her the notice, the county file with Jordan's name in the logs, the timestamps, the mismatched photos, and finally the videos of my sister and her little crew playing demolition in the dark. Alexis watched in silence, then leaned back and said, "Your sister did not just cross an ethical line, she set up camp on the other side." She explained that what they had done looked like fraud, official misconduct, and conspiracy, and probably a few things she would think of on the drive home. Then she told me something I did not expect to hear. Do not confront her yet. People who are willing to do this do not stop at one attempt. If they suspect you know, they might try to destroy more evidence or cause real damage before we can move. Let them think you are scared and stuck. Keep the house locked, keep the cameras on, and if they come back to finish what they started, we will be ready. For a few days after that meeting with Alexis, I did exactly what she told me to do, which felt like the hardest thing in the world. I played scared. When my sister texted to remind me that my 15 days were ticking down, I responded with short, panicked messages about not being able to afford repairs and not knowing what to do. When she called and gently repeated her offer, I let my voice shake, told her I needed more time, and let her think I was circling the drain. Meanwhile, Alexis had already sent copies of the videos and documents to a contact in the Travis County Sheriff's Office and flagged the situation for the district attorney's office. They did not promise anything, but they told her that if anyone came back to the property, it would not just be between sisters anymore. We turned the lake house into a trap without changing a single board. I left the place mostly dark, curtains drawn, lights on timers to make it look like I was still staying there some nights. Every camera Grandma had installed was armed and synced to my phone. I even went over to Mrs. Whitaker, my grandma's elderly neighbor who still sat out on her porch every evening, and told her that if she ever saw people on my deck late at night, she should feel free to record it on her phone, for my own peace of mind. She patted my hand and said, "Honey, I have been recording my crazy neighbors since the VCR days. You picked the right retiree." The break came late on a humid Thursday, just a few days before the deadline on that orange notice. I was in my apartment in Austin, half watching some cooking show in the background, when my phone buzzed with a motion alert from the lake house. At first, I thought it was a raccoon. When I opened the live feed from the back camera, my heart jumped into my throat. There they were again, 3 figures in reflective vests and hard hats, moving fast along the side of the house toward the deck. One of them looked up just enough for the porch light to catch her face and erase any doubt. Jordan. Behind her was Trevor with his familiar bucket and sledgehammer, and a fourth man this time, someone younger carrying a toolbox. I watched them head straight for the foundation line on the lake side of the house like they had done this 100 times before. Jordan's voice carried even over the tiny phone speaker. She told Trevor to open up a couple of clean cracks at the corners, enough to make any follow-up inspector freak out. She mentioned that if the piers looked worse on a second visit, the county could justify an even faster demolition. My hands were shaking, but I did what Alexis and I had rehearsed. I hit record on my screen, then called 911 and told the dispatcher that a county official and her contractor husband were actively damaging a supposedly condemned structure at my address, and that the sheriff's office would find a note on file about it. The dispatcher's tone changed the second I said Alexis's name and the case number she had given me. She told me deputies were already in the area and headed that way. While I stayed on the line, another alert popped up, this time from the doorbell camera across the street. Mrs. Whitaker, bless her nosy heart, had stepped out onto her porch and started filming with her phone as soon as she saw flashlights moving around my dock. By the time the sheriff's trucks rolled up, sirens off, but lights flashing. There were at least 3 different lenses pointed at my sister and her crew. Deputies came around the corner of the house and caught them in the act. Trevor mid-swing with the sledgehammer at the base of a support column, chunks of concrete already on the ground. One of the other men was pouring some kind of liquid from a jug into a crack they had just created. On the audio from the body cams later, you can hear Jordan trying to flip instantly into professional mode, telling the deputies they were conducting an emergency safety follow-up. Then the sergeant says her full name and department out loud and tells her they have prior video showing her doing the opposite of protecting public safety. The look on her face is something I will never forget. She went pale, then red, then tried to demand a lawyer even as they were reading her rights. Within hours, she was booked into the county jail on suspicion of fraud, official oppression, and criminal mischief, and suspended from her job pending investigation. The local news stations picked up the story that same night, running grainy stills from the cameras of a county code enforcement leader in a hard hat standing under a deck with a hammer while deputies closed in. By the next morning, somebody had clipped the footage of her being led away in handcuffs beside a sheriff's truck and posted it on TikTok with a caption about karma on Lake Travis. It racked up millions of views so fast that by the time Alexis and I sat down with the district attorney's office that afternoon, everyone in the room had already seen my sister's walk of shame on their phones. And as investigators started digging into other emergency condemnations she had pushed through, they began to notice the same pattern repeating, the same contractor names, the same LLCs buying up suddenly unsafe homes from owners who had been scared into selling. The investigation that started with those late-night videos from my grandma's cameras did not stop at my dock. Once the district attorney's office pulled every emergency condemnation my sister had pushed in the last few years, a pattern practically circled itself in red. Same kind of properties every time, older homes on good land, often inherited or owned by retirees, suddenly labeled unsafe with dramatic language and short deadlines. In case after case, scared owners had sold fast to shell companies that turned out to be tied to Trevor's renovation business. In total, 4 other families had been pushed into selling for pennies on the dollar, and the profit on those flips added up to more than $1.1 million. Sitting in the courtroom months later, listening to the charges read out loud, felt surreal. I was not just the little sister in a family fight anymore. I was a victim in a corruption case with a docket number and a row of reporters taking notes. Jordan's lawyers tried to paint it as overzealous code enforcement gone wrong, a few bad decisions made under stress, but the videos of her directing damage at my foundation, the false photos in the county file, and the money trail from those other houses told a different story. In the end, she took a plea deal, but it still meant 2 years and 2 months in federal prison, lifetime bans from holding public office or working in code enforcement again, and a civil judgment that made her jointly responsible for hundreds of thousands of dollars in restitution to me and the other owners. Trevor got his own sentence, shorter but still real time, and his company shut down in disgrace. They had to sell their big house in the suburbs to pay lawyers and settlements. The last I heard, after prison, Jordan was living in a one-bedroom apartment off the highway and working overnight shifts waiting tables. A woman who used to brag about making the hard calls for the community now smiling for tips from drunk tourists at 2 in the morning. The county did not walk away clean either. Public pressure and lawsuits forced them to change the way condemnations worked. Now, any emergency order has to be signed off by 2 independent inspectors, with photos verified and surprise audits from an outside panel. They even created an ombudsman office so regular people have somewhere to go if they think a city department is abusing its power. As for me, I kept the house. The county lifted the unsafe label based on Patricia's report and their own honest reinspection, and paid to repair the cosmetic damage Jordan and her crew had actually caused. On the day the last contractor left, I stood on the deck where my sister had once swung a hammer and opened a cheap bottle of wine. I poured a glass, watched the light fade over Lake Travis, and whispered, "You were right, Grandma. You really did know who should protect this place." I think about everything that happened a lot, not because I enjoy the drama, but because there is a hard lesson baked into it. Family can love you and still cross lines you never thought they would cross when money and control are on the table. Blood does not give anyone the right to lie, manipulate, or use their job to hurt you. Knowing your rights, knowing how to ask for records, how to call in an independent expert, how to find a good lawyer. Those things are not just for corporations and rich people. They are basic tools for protecting yourself and the people you love. And sometimes the most caring thing you can do for your family and your community is refuse to quietly accept abuse just because it is coming from someone who shares your last name. If I had taken that lowball offer because I was scared, 4 other families would have lost everything and never known why. Have you ever had to stand up to your own family just to protect what was yours or someone else's? Tell me in the comments, because I promise you are not the only one. And if there is an inherited house or an old property in your life that you have been too overwhelmed to look closely at, maybe log into the cameras, check the paperwork, and ask a few extra questions. You have no idea what you might be saving yourself from until you see it in the light.
Our team at Revenge Argon is dedicated to crafting powerful, meaningful scripts that blend emotion, tension, and reflection. We promise that every story on this channel is purely fictional and created with the sole purpose of sharing helpful lessons and educational, positive messages with our viewers. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way through. If you enjoyed it, please consider hitting that follow button. It gives me the motivation to keep creating even more intense, high quality, and engaging stories for you.